The lectionary we read is an ancient set of readings assigned for each Sunday in the church year. It covers the story of the New Testament in epistle and gospel. The old lectionary that we use assigns exactly the same readings on the same days every single year. It's not broke, don't fix it. That's what I say. Across Europe, across America, for centuries, Christians have read the exact same passages on the exact same days every single year. Now there's a new lectionary which aims to incorporate more readings from the 20th century. It's on a 3-year cycle that's called the Revised Common Lectionary. And in that one you get an Old Testament reading, a psalm, an epistle reading, and a gospel reading. You've got year A, year B, and year C. So 3 years instead of 1 year. It's my opinion, if you'll follow my arguments, that these Old Testament passages need to be done in sequence. You can't pop around like you can with epistles and gospels, because the Old Testament world is too foreign to us. The political realities are too strange. The tribal warfare is too technical for you to just pop in and get a little message. You need to see the whole thing. So suffer with me. I say suffer. This is going to be a fun, exciting, interesting thing with drama, conquest, and intrigue. We're going to go through the book of Judges. Now that Trinity Sunday has come and passed, there's a long gap until Advent starts again. We're going to read Judges. We're going to get a comprehensive picture. So, as we've said, the first 5 books are the books of Moses. Moses led the Israelites in the Exodus out of Egypt. They're called the books of Moses because he wrote them, even though the story starts way before him with Adam and then Noah and then Abraham. Moses leads the people out, but due to their unfaithfulness, they have to wander in the wilderness for a generation, for 40 years, and that generation cannot enter the promised land of Canaan. Now the Canaanites were evil in God's sight. God instructed war by Israel against the natives in Canaan. We call this the Canaanite conquest, and we read it in Deuteronomy chapter 20, which says, "However, in the cities of the nations the Lord your God is giving you as an inheritance, do not leave anything alive that breathes. Completely destroy them, the Hittites, the Amorites, Canaanites, Perizzites, Hivites, and Jebusites, as the Lord your God has commanded you. Otherwise, they will teach you to follow all the detestable things they do in worshiping their gods, and you will sin against the Lord your God." They need to conquer the Canaanites in the land that the Lord has given them, because if not, the Israelites will copy the pagan worship of the Canaanites. Keep that cause and effect in mind. So Moses and his generation cannot enter the promised land. After he passes, Joshua, who was Moses' assistant, leads the people in war. They enter the promised land. They engage in warfare. Joshua is a powerful figure. He leads the battle against Jericho, remember? He dies at age 110, and the job is not done. The people have not finished the Canaanite conquest. So after Joshua comes the book of Judges. Now this book of Judges is not a book written by judges, like the books of Moses are written by Moses. It's a history of Israel during the time of the judges. It's written after they've passed, during the monarchy. A repeated theme later in the book is that in those days, there was no king in Israel. Everyone did what was right in his own eyes. So this person living during the monarchy looks backwards and says, in the time of the judges, everyone did what was right. There was no king in Israel. What was right in his own eyes, subjectively. So this repeated theme is taken by liberal and secular academics to say, well, this is just propaganda for the monarchy. They don't assume an inspiration view like we do, that God wrote this, God meant every word. We can take it more or less at face value. It does seem to read a little bit like monarchy propaganda. We'll address that issue when it comes up, when we get there. As we study this book, we need to keep the big IMAX picture in view. At face value, this is the history of Israel. It's history editorialized by the man who wrote it and the God who inspired its writing. History is violent and complex, and our job is not ever to explain away what we find, right? That's a temptation. If it doesn't fit our sensibilities, we make excuses. No, we should read this and learn from it in its context. Today in chapter 1, we see the foundation of Israel's fall from their commission, from their conquest instructed against the Canaanites. And what we see is that pragmatic compromises in the face of God's command lead to spiritual decline. We'll read bit by bit. Verse 1, after the death of Joshua, the Israelites inquired of the Lord, who shall go up first for us against the Canaanites to fight against them? The Lord said, Judah shall go up. I hereby give the land into his hand. Judah said to his brother Simeon, come up with me into the territory allotted to me, that we may fight against the Canaanites. Then I too will go with you into the territory allotted to you. So Simeon went with him. Then Judah went, and the Lord gave the Canaanites and the Perizzites into their hand, and they defeated 10,000 of them at Bezek. They came upon Adoni-Bezek at Bezek and fought against him, and defeated the Canaanites and the Perizzites. Adoni-Bezek fled, but they pursued him, and caught him, and cut off his thumbs and big toes. Adoni-Bezek said, 70 kings with their thumbs and big toes cut off used to pick up scraps under my table. As I have done, so God has paid me back. They brought him to Jerusalem, and he died there. Then the people of Judah fought against Jerusalem and took it. They put it to sword and set the city on fire. Afterward, the people of Judah went down to fight against the Canaanites who lived in the hill country, in the Negeb, and in the lowland. Judah went against the Canaanites who lived in Hebron. The name of Hebron was formerly Kiriath Arba. And they defeated Sheshai and Ahiman and Talmai. From there they went against the inhabitants of Debir. The name of Debir was formerly Kiriath Sefer. Then Caleb said, whoever attacks Kiriath Sefer and takes it, I will give him my daughter Achsah as wife. And Othniel, son of Kenaz, Caleb's younger brother, took it, and he gave him his daughter Achsah as wife. When she came to him, she urged him to ask her father for a field. As she dismounted from her donkey, Caleb said to her, what do you wish? She said to him, give me a present. Since you have set me in the land of the Negeb, give me also Goloth Mayim. So Caleb gave her Upper Goloth and Lower Goloth. Okay, the chapter opens positively with the Israelites inquiring to the Lord directly to see who should lead them, who should lead the charge. And the answer is Judah. Judah then turns to Simeon, which is his right, to faithfully partner together. You scratch my back, I'll scratch your back. You come with me at war over here, and I will go with you over here. We're talking about Judah the man, not just the tribe that came after him. Excuse me, we are talking about the tribe. The armies that are behind the tribe. The armies of Judah and Simeon attacked the Canaanites and prevailed. They did this in obedience to God, and their victory is described as God giving them the land. He gave their enemies into their hand. And there's an interesting story about them defeating Adoni-Bezek at a place called Bezek. You've heard the name Adonai. We give that to our God. Adonai, like Adonijah, it means Lord. So this person is just called the Lord at Bezek. He was the ruler in that place. They don't just beat this guy. they humiliate him. They dominate him, and they mutilate him. They take off his thumbs and his toes. This was not a peculiar, cruel ritual that the Jews dreamed up. I say Jews as in the tribe of Judah. We see the same custom in ancient Athens, in Greece. Think about this practically. You've defeated a warrior. How well can he draw a sword against you with no thumbs? And how fast can he run away from you with no big toes? It's symbolic, it's also painful, and it's humiliating. We should take this at face value. The good guys have won, and we see even in the narrative, the bad guy admits that he's the problem. He says, 70 kings I have done this to, and they used to pick up scraps under my table. I have humiliated many. As I have done, so also God has done to me. God has clearly led you to prevail against me. It's interesting, and maybe not a coincidence, that the scraps under the table is picked up in our New Testament gospel reading, that in the parable of the rich man and Lazarus, Lazarus, the poor man, humiliatingly picks up scraps at the rich man's table. The same story, the same turn of phrase here in the Old Testament. This king, very powerful, is defeated. He's a king stronger than 70 other kings, and yet the Lord prevails against him. The narrator, the one writing, then records the zealous conquest of the southern highlands, particularly with Caleb, the bravery of Othniel, and the blessing that is given to Caleb's daughter, Achsah. This section is what the conquest was meant to look like. The people were faithful. They implore of God. God gives them direction. They follow their instructions to a T. They prevail in war, and then they're blessed. The density of the names also gives you a sense of the one writing. This is just simple ancient history. Well, maybe recent history. The way we would talk about the Civil War, we'd talk about the Battle of Batchelder's Creek, which is down 55, right? This writer, kind of like Luke in the New Testament, is just recording places and names to set the record for what has happened. This place was once called by this name, and that name was once used for this place. You notice that in verse 8, they attack the city of Jerusalem. The Judahites are attacking the city of Jerusalem. Now that might strike you as weird, right? Well, Jerusalem was not originally an Israelite or Jewish city. It was occupied by the Jebusites. And this victory that they have, they enter, they set the city on fire. This is not even a permanent victory here. Jerusalem is not permanently conquered by the Israelites until King David. David was a king that comes in the monarchy after the time of the judges. Okay, the big picture in this section. Keep it in view as we go on. When the Israelites seek God's will and they act faithfully and together in unity, God grants them the victory. And that victory in the providence of God is at the same time described as theirs, they attained it, and God giving them into their hand. So God arranges history so that they did it and God did it. That's the one and the same. It doesn't always go this way. Let's keep reading. Verse 16. The descendants of Hobab, the Kenites, Moses' father-in-law, went up with the people of Judah from the city of palms into the wilderness of Judah, which lies in the Negeb near Arad. Then they went and settled with the Amalekites. Judah went with his brother Simeon, and they defeated the Canaanites who inhabited Zephath and devoted it to destruction. So the city was called Hormah. Judah took Gaza with its territory, Ashkelon with its territory, and Ekron with its territory. The Lord was with Judah, and he took possession of the hill country, but could not drive out the inhabitants of the plain, because they had chariots of iron. Hebron was given to Caleb. As Moses has said, he drove out from it the 3 sons of Anak. But the Benjaminites did not drive out the Jebusites who lived in Jerusalem. So the Jebusites have lived in Jerusalem among the Benjaminites to this day. The Lord was with Joseph also. The house of Joseph also went up against Bethel, and the Lord was with them. The house of Joseph sent out spies to Bethel. The name of the city was formerly Luz. When the spies saw a man coming out of the city, they said to them, "Show us the way into the city, and we will deal kindly with you." So he showed them the way into the city, and they put the city to the sword. But they let the man and all his family go. So the man went to the land of the Hittites and built a city, and named it Luz. That is its name to this day. We'll pause there again. Here we start to see a decline. The Kenite clan of Jethro. Jethro is also called Hobab. That's one of those things in the Old Testament. Or allies of Israel, but not members of Israel. Israel is composed of the tribes. Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, that's the genealogy. Jacob's name is changed to Israel. And each of the patriarchs have a tribe named after them. Jethro was Moses' father-in-law. And his people group was the Midianites, also called the Kenites. The Kenites are described in the Bible as a quiet and peaceful people. These Kenites make peace and live with the Amalekites. Now, the Amalekites are the enemies of Israel. The Kenites are friends with Israel. They're not enemies of the Amalekites either. It's getting politically complicated. Amalek was a grandson of Esau. Remember, Jacob I loved, Esau I hated. This was clan warfare prescribed by God. The Amalekites were enemies of Israel and had battled with them in the book of Joshua. So it's kind of a compromise that the Kenites settle with the Amalekites. It's not clear if it's so unfaithful on the part of Israel to allow this to happen. Now, the Kenites, from their perspective, they've got no obligation to engage in warfare against Canaan. God told Israel to do that. The Kenites are friends with Israel, but not members of Israel. The Amalekites hated Israel in return, but they had no beef with the Kenites. So I read this, I think we should all, as the narrator recording history, showing us the complex political circumstances of the conquest, which leads to the discomfort of Israel in carrying out the conquest with their unfaithfulness and compromise. In verse 19, we see an open failure. Judah fails in battle against the hill country because his enemies have iron chariots. So the story of the Kenites is, this is politically complex. So that's the first motivation to compromise. Next, Judah has a defeat, and that's another reason to compromise. Do we really want to do this? We're getting beat. I want to point out that this verse is sometimes taken as an atheist apologetic against the Christian Bible. You might see this in some Facebook meme. Verse 19. The Lord was with Judah, and he took possession of the hill country, but could not drive out the inhabitants of the plain because they had chariots of iron. So some try to take this as a gotcha. The Lord was with Judah. He could not drive out the inhabitants of the plain because they had chariots of iron. The gotcha is, well, how could an all-powerful God not beat an iron chariot? He doesn't sound very strong to me. If you just follow the grammar, though, the Lord was with Judah, and Judah could not drive out the inhabitants of the plain because his enemies had iron chariots. It's kind of a lame argument, but it's worth looking into because it's informing our understanding of warfare and conquest at the time. Apparently, The Lord can be with Israel, or an army of Israel, and this is not an overwhelming factor in securing their victory. Do you see that? The Lord was with them, and yet they still failed. The nature of God's presence with them was not like bringing a gun to a knife fight. Do you see my point? These battles for the Israelites still seem to involve faith, efforts, and sacrifice on their part. This is real warfare. There's still real technicalities of political maneuvering and technology. So, this failure is another motivation to walk back the priorities, to reevaluate the standards of victory. They should maybe be growing to fear their enemies more. If they lost in battle, they probably had some casualties. And perhaps, I want to suggest, perhaps their fear of the iron chariots is what caused their failure. They did not trust in God against them because their enemies were greater and stronger. Now compare that in the pre-monarchy period with David, the smallest of the brothers, fighting Goliath, the giant Philistine, who's maybe left over from the flood narrative. Anyway, the narrator is terse. The narrator is just telling the facts, the one writing the history. The first objective act of unfaithfulness is Benjamin living among the Jebusites instead of driving them out. He makes this deal with the spy. He lets the spy and his family go, and what do? They just go to the Hittites and they build another city. And that city is still called Luz to this day, says the writer. So already you can see, foreshadowing, the conquest does not work. The city of Luz is still there. The house of Joseph, Joseph makes the deal. Benjamin fails to drive out. Joseph makes the deal with the spy. Instead of driving him out of the place, letting him live, but driving him out of the land of Canaan, this man goes with his family and he builds another city, and that city is still with him. By the way, you can see in this the terms of the conquest were not slaughter everything that breathes, but drive out all of them from the land. That involves killing, to be sure, but the minimum terms were get them out of this land that is now allotted to you, Israel. Keep the big picture again. The Israelites fail when they distrust God and make pragmatic compromise. This is most clearly seen when Judah failed to drive out the valley inhabitants because they're intimidated by the iron chariots. Furthermore, Israelites start making practical, disobedient deals with the enemy, like Benjamin coexisting with the Jebusites, or Joseph, the house of Joseph, letting the Canaanite spy leave. It gets worse from here. Let's finish it up, verse 27. Manasseh did not drive out the inhabitants of Beth Shean and its villages, or Tanakh and its villages, or the inhabitants of Dor and its villages, or the inhabitants of Ibleam and its villages, or the inhabitants of Megiddo and its villages. But the Canaanites continued to live in that land. When Israel grew strong, they put the Canaanites to forced labor, but did not, in fact, drive them out. And Ephraim did not drive out the Canaanites who lived in Gezer, but the Canaanites lived among them in Gezer. And Zebulun did not drive out the inhabitants of Kitron, or the inhabitants of Nahalal, but the Canaanites lived among them and became subject to forced labor. Asher did not drive out the inhabitants of Akko, or the inhabitants of Sidon, or of Elab, or of Achzib, or of Helba, or of Aphik, or of Rahab, but the Asherites lived among the Canaanites, the inhabitants of the land, for they did not drive them out. Naphtali did not drive out the inhabitants of Beth Shemesh, or the inhabitants of Beth Anath, but lived among the Canaanites, the inhabitants of the land. Nevertheless, the inhabitants of Beth Shemesh and of Beth Anath became subject to forced labor for them. The Amorites pressed the Danites back into the hill country. They did not allow them to come down into the plain. The Amorites continued to live in Har Heres, in Aijalon, and in Shaalbim. But the hand of the house of Joseph rested heavily on them, and they became subject to forced labor. The border of the Amorites ran from the ascent of Akrabim, from Selah and upward. There the chapter leaves us. Here, the Israelites have clearly abandoned their mission. We get at first a list of failures from the northern tribes: Manasseh, Ephraim, Zebulun, Asher, Naphtali. The northern tribes would later become the kingdom of Israel. To read ahead, not to overcomplicate things, all these names are getting thrown out. When the kingdom of Israel divided, the northern kingdom was called Israel, the southern kingdom was called Judah. Jerusalem was in Judah. In verse 28, the writer, the historian, seems to locate the start of the north's decline way back here to their complacency and weakness during the time of the judges. But failure is not unique to the northern tribes. The tribes in this section all either live among the Canaanites, they assimilate with the Canaanites, or they keep them as slaves. Our Pew translation keeps saying forced labor. Other translations more directly say slaves. We should note that slavery in the Old Testament books of Moses is permitted, including the slaves of conquered peoples. This comes out in Deuteronomy. Yet, the Canaanites are not permitted to be kept as slaves because, as we already read from Deuteronomy 20, the conquest imperative is drive them out. Destroy them. Don't let one that breathes stay among your land, because if they're here, you're going to worship like them. You're going to follow their false gods. You will commit idolatry, violating the second commandment against the true God, the God of Israel, who left you out of bondage in Egypt. So in context, the keeping of slaves isn't included as an instance of Israelite evil. Slavery per se isn't mentioned as if it's an evil. It's mentioned as disobedience on the part of Israelites. They would rather keep these people as slaves with the memory of being slaves themselves in Egypt, rather than drive them out, because it's easier, it's nice. These people work for us, we can compel them to. The worst failure of all comes from the tribe of Dan. Everyone compromises on the conquest, all these tribes in a row. They don't totally get rid of them. And finally in Dan actually loses. They don't partially expel, they get expelled, pushed back themselves. The Danites lose to the Amorites. The Amorites pressed the Danites back into the hill country. They did not allow them to come down into the plain. The Amorites continued to live in Har Hedges, and so on. So the conquerors have become the conquered. We started the chapter with victory after victory. The Israelites inquired of the Lord led them, the Lord gave them into their hand, and progressively, as it got harder, the tribes lived among them, they kept them as slaves, and then finally, the Canaanites are winning against the Israelites. Complacency, and I would say greed, leads to Israel's direct disobedience and eventual defeat. Now, you're not going to get a pop quiz and all these place names, but what do we learn from here? Remember what we said at the start. Our job is to read and understand God's word. That's our job every time we open the Bible. God has said it, we need to understand it. We don't talk back to God. We talk to him in prayer and asking him for things, but we don't critique him on what he's told us. Today we see the stage set for the rest of the story of Judges. Let's remember that none of these Canaanite armies were as strong as Egypt. Egypt was a powerhouse. The Great Pyramid in Giza was the biggest structure in the whole world until like the Middle Ages. this central period of the Middle Ages. Egypt was defeated while Israel didn't even have an army by the direct act of God just one generation before this. Well, let's count. The time of Moses, the time of Joshua, 2 generations, and they lived a long time. God defeated Egypt. God did perform the Passover, where he passed over, the angel of death passed over the Israelite faithful and attacked the firstborn sons of Egypt. God defeated the armies of Egypt in the Red Sea after they passed through, the waters collapse and destroy Pharaoh and his armies. And yet, this people failed to trust and obey. They did it right after the Exodus when they worshiped the golden calf at Mount Sinai. They're doing it again here when God is leading them in the promised land. They're failing to trust God. We can't help but shake our heads in pity and embarrassment for them, right? Well, it's kind of easy to do that sitting in this air-conditioned room all these years later. Let's remember where we are in this story. This is not just a cautionary tale about a backwards people. We're not perfect followers. We have temptations of our own. But remember, if you are in the church, this is your family history, to put it directly. Romans 11, some of the branches were broken off, and you Gentiles, although a wild olive shoot, were grafted in among the others, and now share in the nourishing root of the olive tree. This is Israel. This is the hard part of Israel's family history, and you were grafted in, not literally, not biologically, but you're incorporated into God's faithful people. As we study the book of Judges, we will learn from past mistakes. We will see the urgency to obey God, the need to maintain the faith on His terms, and the severe and sometimes gruesome consequences for unfaithfulness. We will study this in light of New Testament promises like Philippians 2, that it is God who works in you, both to will and to work for His good pleasure. Let us pray for such a faith, for wisdom and obedience. Pray with me.